where we will be looking at the multiplier concept for this afternoon. Right, when we speak about the macroeconomic multiplier, this is also called the ripple or snowball effect. So if you think about how a snowball is formed, it's as it rolls down a hill and it collects more and more and more snow, it becomes bigger and bigger. So we will see how the macroeconomic multiplier is known as the ripple or snowball effect. This is derived from the marginal propensity to consume. Now, the word propensity, meaning the amount of money that consumers or businesses or government is spending, okay? So more spending by one person results into an income by the other. And the two elements that are extremely important here are consumption and savings, because both of these is going to have an effect on what that multiplier is going to be at the end of the day. But we will be taking a much closer look at all of these as we go through this. Right, so we're first going to look at what is the multiplier. So the question might say, what is the multiplier? What is your understanding of the term multiplier? So the multiplier shows how an increase in spending or in injections produces a more than proportional increase in national income, meaning that whatever is being spent in the economy, that is money that's being injected into the economy. So irrespective of what's being injected, that will cause a more than proportional increase. So for example, if the injection is 10%, the increase in the eventual national income is going to be more than that 10% original injection. The multiplier effect indicates the overall change in income due to the expenditure or investment that took place. And the way we calculate it, we multiply the value of the multiplier by the total of the injection or the investment. And obviously I will be showing you how we are going to calculate the value of the multiplier, whereas the total injection or investment will be given to you. Right, so as I said in the beginning, the initial spending becomes someone's income. Now, once people have that income, they decide what to do with that money. They will spend some of it, or they will save, and they will save some of it. Some people will spend all of it and not save. Others will save more than what they spend, but it is up to the individual to decide what they're going to do with that income. So the spend portion, or the amount that you go and spend, becomes someone else's income. So if you think about this, when you go to the shops and you go and spend 1,000 rand at a shop, that shop has earned 1,000 rand from you. So that 1,000 rand has become their income, although it's the money you've spent. So then this someone spends some and saves some, and so it goes on, and that is why it is called the multiplier effect, because as we move from one person to the next, the money gets more and more and more. So just to do another quick example once again, let's say I take 50 rand and I go to the tuck shop at school and I've got 50 rand, but I only go to the tuck shop and I spend 40 rand of my 50 rand. So now the tuck shop lady has earned 40 rand. She then uses that 40 rand to go and buy in more stock, and let's say she decides she's not saving any of this money, she's spending the entire 40 rand. But remember, I've spent 40 and she has spent 40, so in total 80 rand has been spent. But that 80 rand that has been spent is as a result of the 140 rand. So it means that the original 40 rand that was spent has now doubled. So do you understand? It has multiplied. Okay. Here's another example. If you picked up 100 rand and spent 75 rand and decide to save 25 Rand. Then your marginal propensity to consume, which is also known as the MPC, and please, can't stress this enough, this MPC that we're referring to here is in small letters, because remember, this stands for marginal propensity to consume, whereas the capital letter MPC is the Monetary Policy Committee. So don't confuse the two MPCs. So your marginal propensity to consume, the MPC is then 0.75. How did we get to that? It is 75% of what you have picked up, right? And your marginal propensity to save is 0.25, which means you've spent 75%, but you've saved 25%. So obviously, if you look at the money you've received, whatever you have not spent, that is then your savings. So therefore, your MPC plus the MPS equals 1, right? So your MPC plus MPS equals 1. So there are only two things one can do with new income, and that is you either spend it or you save it. In this example here, the consumer is saving 25% of their income, but they can save any percentage. They could save 10%, 30%, it's entirely up to them. Now, very important with every section that you start is that you know your terminology. This is so important because terminology is what gets tested not only in Section A, it is tested throughout an economics paper. Remember, you've got Section A is all about your terminology and your concepts, but in Section B, your 2.2.3, your 2.3.3, 3.2.3, 3.3.3, as well as your introduction to your essay, all of them together are where we are testing terminology or concepts. And if you add all of that up, because remember, you've got to answer 2 Section B questions and the entire Section A. And Section A is worth 30 marks. 2 of these in Section B is another 8 marks. And in Section C, you've got your introduction as well. So in total, there is 40 marks on just definitions that is tested. Right, so when it comes to the multiplier, the important terminology or concepts are obviously the term injections, because as we spend money, whether it's us spending money or the government, so remember, government expenditure is an injection, consumer expenditure is an injection, and business expenditure, otherwise known as investments, is also an injection. So this is cash that is injected into the economy. Then we also have the opposite of injections are our leakages, right? This is when money is withdrawn from the economy. So if you look at, we spoke about government expenditure is the injection, but the leakage for government expenditure is the taxes, because that's how government earns their income, is through the taxes that we pay. So as a consumer, when I pay my taxes, it's a leakage, but in the hands of government, that taxation becomes an injection in the form of government spending. At the same time, the savings that I put into the bank is a leakage, because it's money that I'm not spending, so it's money that's withdrawn from the economy. So as a consumer putting money away or saving money, it's a leakage, but then that savings is used by banks to give to businesses so that they can expand their operations. So savings from consumers becomes investments for businesses again, and that is an injection. And then, of course, the other one that we have is the imports, and the opposite of imports is obviously your exports. Right, so equilibrium, as we all know, equilibrium exists when aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. So even when we're looking at what's happening within the economy, we look at where our injections and our leakages come together. Right, So we work with a two-sector model economy, and when we talk about the two-sector model, we're talking about households and businesses. There is no government involved. Right? Your MPC, as I said earlier on, your marginal propensity to consume, refers to that portion of disposable income that household spends instead of saving. And obviously marginal propensity to save is opposite. It is that portion of disposable income that households save instead of spending. Right, so just to go through the terminology one more time so that we understand all of it. We've got injections when money comes in, leakages when money leaves, equilibrium where the one is equal to the other, and a two-sector model consists of households and businesses, no government involved or no government present. Your MPC is that portion of income that is spent. MPS is that portion of income that is saved. Right. What you should know. In other words, what knowledge should you already have in order to understand or to be able to do the multiplier. So remember, this is still part of the circular flow, and the original circular flow was taught to you in grade 10. Then earlier in the year, we looked at the national account aggregates, which is also part of circular flow. And now the last portion of the circular flow that we're doing is the multiplier. So you were taught in grade 10 about injections, where J, which is the letter which represents injections, is equal to I plus G plus X. And the I is obviously investments, like I said earlier on, business expenditure, government expenditure, and exports. Whereas our leakages, this is money leaving the economy, and L is equal to S for savings, plus T for taxes, plus M for imports. And then equilibrium is obviously where the injections are equal to the leakages. And then you were also taught in grade 10 this little formula, Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. And what this stands for is obviously the Y is the income, C for consumption, I investment, G government expenditure, X is for exports, and M is for imports. Right. So, an increase in private consumer spending leads to an increase in economic activity. So what does that mean? As consumers earn more money, right, as their income is increasing, they will also then spend more money. And by them spending more, remember, when you spend, that is what is known as demand. So because consumers are demanding more, businesses are having to increase their levels of production, meaning the economic activity is increasing, which obviously eventually leads to economic growth. The government's main expenditure is on the salaries of civil servants and on goods and services. For those of you who don't know, civil servants are government workers, right? So any business, actually, their major expenditure is salaries, but government obviously spends most of its money on the salaries and on the public goods and services provided. And then this concept isn't new to you. You should know by now, GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product, is the market value of all final goods and services produced within national borders within a certain period, usually a year. Right? So many times students are able to give you this definition very beautifully, but then they end at borders. They just said the market value of all final goods and services produced within the national borders. You have to add this last part as well, within a certain period, usually a year. Right, you also should remember, as I said earlier on, we did the GDP calculations. We did that earlier in the year, and the ways in which GDP can be calculated is your income method, production method, and the expenditure method. But if you recall, I taught you earlier on to remember the word pie, right? Standing P for production, I for income, and E for expenditure. Please make sure you still remember how to do those calculations. We don't have time to go over that now. Right, so now we're getting to what your multiplier is all about. Right, so we have something that is known as the Keynesian graph. It is also known as the 45-degree graph as well, right? So that's another name for it. But we use the term Keynesian because I had a student who went on to study economics further, and he said to me, you never taught us the Keynesian graph, and they're talking, and then I had to explain, okay, we didn't refer to it as the Keynesian graph, we called it the 45-degree graph, so it's the same thing. Okay, so just to explain to you what each of these means, as you know, each graph has two axes, and important here, you have to label those axes. So here we have the expenditure on the vertical axis, and on our horizontal axis, we've got income represented by the letter Y, and expenditure obviously represented by the letter E. And this line here, which is your 45-degree line, that is where Y is equal to E, meaning expenditure anywhere along this line is where your income and expenditure are going to be equal. And this 45-degree line is known as the line of equilibrium. Please do not get confused with the graph that was taught in term 3, where you also had a 45-degree line, but that was the line of equality when we did the Lorentz curve, okay? So please remember, this one here is your line of equilibrium, meaning at any point along this 45-degree line, or the line where income is equal to expenditure, that is where the economy can then be in equilibrium. Okay, Y equals E is called the line of equilibrium. E is known as the point of equilibrium, right? And then C is equal to 20 plus 0.5Y. So what does all of this mean? C, the letter C, stands for consumption or total spending, right? And therefore, it is this total that is spent by businesses and households. So your 20 is representing what is being spent by businesses, whereas the 0.5Y is telling us what households are spending. So what this is telling us that this could be 20 Rand, okay, in this instance here it's 20 million Rand has been invested by businesses, plus what is being spent by households, and the 0.5Y is telling me that the households spend 50% of their income, right? That 0.5Y means 50% of Y. So Y, as you know, stands for income, and this is showing us that consumers are spending 50% of their income. So because they're spending 50% of their income, that means that your MPC is equal to 0.5. So now we need to determine where this economy is going to be in equilibrium. How did we get to that point on the graph there? And we said that to get to that point, you take your expenditure, which is the 20 that was invested by the businesses, times by the value of the multiplier. And that's what I said. I will explain to you how you calculate the value of the multiplier. Okay, so to calculate the value of your multiplier, your formula is K. We use the letter K because we can't use M, because remember M is for imports. So because this is the Keynesian graph, we use the letter K is equal to 1 divided by 1 minus MPC, right? So it's 1. So the MPC is 0.5. So therefore it is 1 divided by 0.5 because 1 minus 0.5 is 0.5. So if you take 1 divided by 0.5, which is a half, that will give you 2. So therefore we take 2 times 20, which will then give me 40 million. So that means that that point there represents, if you brought that line down here, you would have 40 because that is where the economy is in equilibrium at 40 million. Okay. Right, so this is one method of calculation. Here is an alternative method, and this is for your math muffins who do economics. They get to understand this quite easily. We said your consumption spending, which is the total income in the economy, is equal to 20 plus 0.5y, right? That's known as your consumption function line, right? So y is equal to 20 plus 0.5y. So what are we taught in maths? You bring all the y's to the one side. So we're bringing that plus 0.5y over to the left-hand side. So now we've already got a one y there minus the 0.5y, which then only leaves us with a 20 on the right-hand side. Okay. So y meaning 1y minus 0.5y gives me 0.5y, which is equal to 20, right? So once again, what does maths teach us? We are multiplying on this side. So when we take it over, we take and we divide on the other side. So therefore, y is equal to 20 divided by 0.5, which will once again give us the answer of 40. So these two methods can be used. So you can either first go calculate the value of the multiplier, which I strongly suggest you do. This is the easier way to do it. And then you take that value that you got times by the spending that has happened or the injection that has taken place to give you your equilibrium point. Right. So when we're just going to show you how to draw the graph quickly. The government invested 20 million in the economy and the MPC is equal to 0.8. Okay. So therefore, here we've got the original 20 million that has been invested, right? And then we see there that it is 20 plus 0.8y, meaning, so if you had to look at, okay, let's look at that a little later on. We will look at, so when you draw your consumption function, it is important that you get your point of equilibrium as well. Okay, so when you draw this consumption function going across from the 20, it's got to be done at your 0.8 gradient, but please, we do not have the time in an exam, so we just draw it roughly, okay? We can't sit with the protractor and get the exact measurements. Right. So, I'm going to give you, let me see, 2 minutes to just quickly look at the questions and make sure you understand them. And obviously the questions are related to the graph that you see on the left. Okay, the first question here says, name the value of autonomous consumption. Now you're probably thinking, I never explained to you about autonomous consumption. Right. The word autonomous comes from the word automatic, and obviously consumption is spending. So what autonomous consumption means is the spending that we have to do. So nobody can say, oh, but I've got zero expenditure for this month. Well, when you're a student and you're living with your parents, you could easily say that because your parents are doing all the spending. But we have to make sure mortgage bonds are paid. We have to make sure that there's food, right? We can't say, oh, we're not buying any food this month, or we're not paying the mortgage this month, or we all be out on the street then. So your value of your autonomous consumption is the expenditure that has to happen. So they're asking you here the value of the autonomous consumption, what was the amount that was invested or spent, and if we look here, the first amount, from the first line here, the autonomous consumption is 20, right? And then it says identify the value of the MPC. And here we can see, let me just see if I can make this a bit bigger. There we go. There you can see the value of the MPC that they want. It says here 20 plus 0.6y. So that means that the value of the multiplier is 0.6y. Right. What is the value of total injections into the economy? Right. So now this is important. What is the value of the total injections that has been put into the economy? Right, can you see that? The total injections. Right. So the total injections is obviously, sorry, I didn't show it to you. The total injections, we see there that it went, we've got a total of 60 that was then spent in the end, okay? Because originally 20 was spent, and then they spent another 40. You see this plus 40 at the back here. So 20 plus the 40 that was spent, so the total spent was 60. Now they say calculate the value of the multiplier. So if you remember, there were two methods that I showed you earlier on how to calculate the value of the multiplier. And those two methods were, let's just go back there. Remember I said this is the one you should use. I said use the 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. And in this case, the MPC was 0.6. So your answer should read 1 over 0.4, right? So if you take 1 divided by 0.4, that should give you an answer of 2.5. And then the last question here says, calculate the effect of the injections on the national income. Okay, so remember, what did we say? How do we do that? We take the value of the multiplier, and in this case, the value was 2.5. How did we get that again? 1 over 1 minus MPC, which was 1 over 1 minus 0.6, which gives me 1 over 0.4, which is equal to 2.5. And then we took that 2.5 times the total of the injections, which is 60. So 2.5 times 60 gives you 150. Right, and there are the answers. If you want to just copy them down quickly. Right, we are looking at the equilibrium in a two-sector model. Now remember, I said to you, in a two-sector model, we have the following assumptions. There is no government present, so there won't be any G. There are only households and businesses, so there's only C plus I. And this is obviously a closed economy, and there are no corporate savings, meaning businesses don't save, they spend everything they earn. And according to Keynes, equilibrium exists when aggregate demand, known as AD, is equal to aggregate supply, which is AS. Also assumes that all income is spent, and therefore income and expenditure are directly proportional. Right, to just summarize what we've done today, expenditure is never zero because there's always something we need to spend on, and I said to you this is known as autonomous consumption or expenditure. This is spending that is not dependent on income. Now, many times in the exam, I will say to them, that portion of spending that is independent. Then they say, but we didn't learn that. Yes, it not dependent means it is independent, okay? So that portion of your spending that is independent from the income. When calculating the multiplier, we look at the money that has been spent and not that which has been saved. The multiplier is derived from the marginal propensity to consume. So the size of the multiplier depends on the proportion of an increase in income that is spent, and we're going to look at this a little later on, or in the exercise after this. So the larger the MPC, meaning the more money that is spent, the bigger the multiplier. So obviously if the MPC is 0.1, it's the multiplier is going to be much smaller than when the MPC is 0.9. Because what does 0.1 and 0.9 means? 0.1 means I'm only spending 10% of my income as opposed to spending 90%. So obviously the more I spend, the bigger the multiplier, and the smaller the MPC, the smaller the multiplier, right? Right, and there I've got another little activity for you quickly to do. And now you need to remember that very first thing I taught you about MPS plus MPC equals 1. And I'm going to give you a minute to it's just 4 little calculations quickly. Remember I said to you, you've got to bear in mind that MPC plus MPS is 1. So if MPC is 0.1, then MPS is going to be 1 minus 0.1, which is going to be 0.9. And if MPS is 0.5, it is going to be 1 minus 0.5, which obviously is going to remain 0.5. If MPC is equal to 0.3, then MPS will be 1 minus 0.3, which will be 0.7. And if MPS is 0.65, then MPC is going to be 1 minus 0.65, which is obviously going to be 0.35. You can just check your answers there once again. Number 1, 0.9, number 2, 0.5, number 3, 0.7, and number 4, 0.35. Right, in activity 2 now, I'm asking you to calculate the value of the multiplier. And in order to calculate the value, don't forget the formula. right? Your formula, K is equal to 1 over 1 minus MPC. K is equal to 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. So write down that formula somewhere so that you can have it next to you while you do these calculations, for which I'm going to give you a minute and a half. Right, so let's look at these answers. So as I said, it is going to be 1 over 1 minus 0.9, which means that is 1 over 0.1. So your answer there will be 10. The next one, it is going to be 1 over 1 minus 0.6, which is once again 1 over 0.4, which is the same we had earlier on. So the answer there is 2.5. But please note, 2.3, they tell you MPS is equal to 0.3. And 1 minus MPC is 0.3. So here you're not going to go 1 over 0.7. Here you're just going to go 1 over 0.3, which is then equal to 3.3 recurring. So be careful. It is important that you look what is being given, right? Because I said it's 1 over 1 minus MPC, and 1 minus MPC is MPS anyway, okay? So you've got to make sure, what are they giving me? Are they giving me MPS or MPC? So this was a little bit of a trick one here. Right, there you can take down your answers very quickly, or just check your answers once again. So please note there, your formula is K equals to 1 over 1 minus MPC or 1 over MPS, because 1 minus MPC is MPS. Right, what you need to take away from today's lesson is obviously this formula. You need to remember that formula, and you need to also understand the graph. Let's just go back to the graph. Right, we'll look at this graph here. You need to understand what this graph means, right? You have, this is E1 and that is E2, meaning this is your original consumption function, or the original expenditure that took place in the economy, which was 20, and then some more money was spent, which took us to 60. So to get from 20 to 60, there was 40 that's being spent, okay? And then based on whatever your MPC is going to determine your equilibrium point, right? That equilibrium point is wrong. It should be there, right? Where the line touches the line of equilibrium, okay? And then obviously you've got to know that's your expenditure, that is income, And that 45-degree line is known as your line of equilibrium. These lines going across is your consumption function. At this stage, you don't need to be concerned about the drawing of the graph. That will be explored a little bit more in grade 12. Right, then just to recap what was done today, the macroeconomic multiplier is about consumer spending and how this injection generates more income for the economy. A model that has been developed by John Maynard Keynes, hence it is called a Keynesian multiplier. And therefore, the graph, as with anything in economics, you must know, the name of the graph is always mentioned after or called whatever the person who came up with the idea, that will be the name of the graph, right? So that's why we have the Keynesian 45-degree graph, which shows us the multiplier. And important to remember are the concepts that we looked at today. You've got to know, so go through even if you've got your grade 10 notes, go back to those grade 10 notes and those list of concepts you've done in grade 10. They are of utmost importance, okay? Understand what is an injection, what is a leakage, and remember, your leakages and injection have a relationship. So you only have to remember the one half, and then obviously it has a relationship with the other. Like I said to you, taxes in the hands of the consumer is a leakage, but in the hands of government, it becomes an injection as government uses that taxes for their spending. So if you just remember the one half, the other half is opposite. And then obviously where your expenditure and your income is equal along the line of equilibrium, or the 45-degree line, that's where you will then find the equilibrium point for the economy. And it is important that to remember that when you think of the multiplier, that initial spending, that initial injection leads to a much larger change within the national income. Right, that brings me to the end of this afternoon session. Thank you very much. And there is no other investment that has the kind of social multiplier effect that clearly education has. It is an incredible thing to nurture and watch, grow and spread. Just a thought I wanted to leave with you with a quote that links us to the topic we've done today. Thank you, grade 11s.